March 1945, Germany. The air is sharp near Trier. The 3rd Army headquarters compound hums with mechanical energy. Jeeps idle in the spring mud. 200 men stand in small groups or move between gray stone buildings. It is a moment of order in a continent of chaos. A white West Point lieutenant walks down a narrow, empty path. He sees a black colonel approaching from the opposite direction. There is nowhere to turn. The regulations are clear. The military hierarchy is absolute. But the lieutenant keeps his eyes fixed forward. He stiffens his neck. He walks past the superior officer as if the man is invisible. He does not raise his hand. He does not acknowledge the rank. It is a deliberate, silent strike against the chain of command. He thinks his pedigree protects him. He is wrong. George Patton is watching. The correction will be public. This is the story of how General Patton handled a young West Point officer who believed his skin color outweighed the silver eagle on a superior's shoulder. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We tell the World War II stories that show what happened when prejudice met consequences. These are the forgotten moments where the rigid rules of war collided with the harsh realities of human nature. Colonel Henry Bennett was 43 years old. He grew up in the red clay country of Georgia. Bennett was a career officer with 22 years of service under his belt. He had worked his way up from the bottom in an army that often did not want him. He had lost his younger brother to a shipyard accident back home while he was overseas. That loss had hardened his resolve to succeed. Bennett commanded a 500-man logistic battalion. His trucks were the lifeblood of the 3rd Army. He had seen the dust of North Africa and the mud of the French interior. He knew the weight of every crate and the cost of every mile. To Bennett, the rank on his collar was a shield against the world that had tried to keep him down. He walked with a straight back and a steady gait. He expected the same professional courtesy he gave to every man in a suit of olive drab. Lieutenant Charles Whitfield was 25 years old. He was a product of the West Point class of 1943. He came from a family of wealth in Charleston, South Carolina. Whitfield was raised in a house with wide porches and a firm belief in the natural order of things. He was a competent leader of men in the field. He had led his platoon through 2 sharp firefights and brought every one of them home alive. He was proud of his record and even prouder of his heritage. He wore a tailored field jacket that showed no wrinkles. His boots were polished to a high, glass-like gloss. To Whitfield, the Army was a place for gentlemen of a specific stripe. He believed his bloodline was a rank all its own. He saw the black colonel walking toward him on the path. He decided that the manual of arms did not apply to a man like Bennett. He kept his hands at his sides. He looked through the colonel as if he were looking at a ghost. It was March 1945. The German lines were snapping like dry twigs. Patton's 3rd Army had crossed the Rhine and was racing toward the heart of the Reich. The speed of the advance was frantic. It depended on thousands of trucks moving millions of gallons of fuel and tons of ammunition. Supply units worked 24 hours a day. They moved through ruined cities and over broken bridges. Trier had become a central hub for this massive movement. The town was a maze of rubble and military police. The war was moving too fast for traditional discipline to catch every crack in the armor. In the rear areas, thousands of men from different backgrounds were mashed together in the mud of the occupation. Racial tension simmered beneath the surface. The United States Army was segregated by law and by habit. Many white officers from the South carried their old ways into the new war. They brought the hierarchies of Charleston and Mobile to the soil of Germany. They ignored the regulations when it fed their pride. They looked the other way when a black soldier was insulted in the street. They pretended not to see when a salute was withheld on the parade ground. Superiors often let these small acts of defiance go. They did not want the paperwork. They did not want the friction in the mess halls. They called it keeping the peace. They called it avoiding trouble. But Patton did not care about that kind of peace. He cared about the machine of war. He cared about the gears of rank. A man's skin did not change the metal on his collar. To him, an officer was an officer. Discipline was a singular thing. It either existed or it did not. Back on the gravel path near the headquarters building, the air went cold as the lieutenant kept walking. Captain Julian Miller stood by the door of the message center. He was 31 years old and came from the gray streets of Chicago. He served with the 10th Armored Division and carried a jagged scar on his shoulder from a piece of German steel in the Ardennes. He had watched the entire exchange on the path. He had seen the black colonel's face remain like stone. He had seen the young lieutenant's chin tilt up in defiance. Miller stepped out into the mud. "Lieutenant, hold it right there," Miller said. Whitfield stopped. He did not turn his body. He only turned his head. "Yes, Captain? You just walked past a bird colonel. I am aware of who is on the path, Captain Miller. You did not salute him. My eyes were on the horizon. I was thinking about my platoon. He was 10 feet away from you. 200 men saw you snub him. I have more important things to occupy my mind than games in the dirt. It is not a game. It is the United States Army. He outranks you by 3 grades. He holds a commission. That does not make him a superior. The manual says otherwise. The regulations are not a suggestion. The manual was not written by people who understand the proper order of the world. What is that supposed to mean, Whitfield? It means I was raised in Charleston. I do not raise my hand to men who should be washing my father's car. He is a battalion commander. He has served 22 years for this country. He could serve 100. It will not change what he is. I will not salute him. That is a direct violation of the Articles of War. You are refusing a protocol of rank. Then write me up. I will explain it to the board. They will understand the distinction. I think you are making a very grave mistake, Lieutenant. I think you have forgotten your place, Miller. I am a West Point man. I know my worth. And you think your worth lets you ignore the silver eagle on his shoulder? I think the eagle is on the wrong man. I am not saluting him now. I am not saluting him ever. You are dismissed, Lieutenant. Get out of my sight. Miller watched the younger man walk away. The arrogance was thick in the air. It was a poison. Miller turned and walked toward the command building. He did not stop at his desk. He went straight to the office of the Chief of Staff. He told the story exactly as it happened. The report moved through the building like a wildfire. It climbed the stairs. It passed the guards. It reached the inner office. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton's jeep pulled up to the headquarters gate within the hour. The 4 silver stars on his helmet flashed in the cold March sun. He stepped out of the vehicle with his ivory-handled revolvers buckled tight to his waist. He did not shout. He did not look angry. He walked with a slow, heavy purpose toward the path where the incident had occurred. Every man in the compound stopped moving. The silence was absolute. Patton stood 6 inches from Whitfield. He studied the lieutenant's tailored jacket. He looked down at the polished boots. "Lieutenant Whitfield, did you encounter a colonel on this path earlier today?" Patton asked. "I did, General," Whitfield said. "Did you render a salute to that officer as required by regulation?" "I did not, sir." "Was it an oversight of the eyes, Lieutenant, or did you simply fail to see him?" "No, sir. It was a conscious choice." "A choice based on what authority?" "On my heritage, sir. I do not acknowledge social equals where they do not exist in the natural order." Patton's voice was quiet, but it carried to the very edge of the crowd. "You speak of heritage. You speak of Charleston. You think the world ends at the South Carolina border. You are wrong. The world ends where the German artillery starts firing. You went to West Point. You were taught that the commission is a sacred trust. You expect your privates to die for you because you wear gold bars. You expect them to follow you into the fire without question. Yet you stand here and tell me you are too good for the regulations that govern us all. Colonel Bennett has 22 years of service. He was leading men while you were playing with toy soldiers in the mud. He is the reason my tanks have fuel. He is the reason you have ammunition to fire. He has earned his eagle through grit and 22 years of professional service. You led 2 fights. That makes you a soldier, but it does not make you a judge of men. If you cannot respect the rank, you have no business wearing it. You are a flaw in the machine of the Third Army. I do not tolerate flaws in my command. You have 2 options. You will walk back across this compound, and you will salute Colonel Bennett properly. You will apologize to him in front of every witness who saw you fail this morning. You will do it now, or I will break you. I will strip those bars and send you to a labor battalion by midnight. Decide." Whitfield's face went pale. He looked at the 200 men watching. He looked at Patton's cold, unblinking eyes. He swallowed hard. He turned and began to walk. Whitfield walked back across the open compound. His polished boots crunched on the wet gravel. The sound was loud in the heavy silence. 200 men stood like statues against the gray stone buildings. Colonel Bennett waited. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply stood with his hands behind his back. The air smelled of diesel exhaust and damp earth. Whitfield reached the colonel and came to a sharp halt. He snapped his hand to the brim of his cap. It was the most perfect salute he had ever rendered. "Colonel Bennett," Whitfield said. His voice was tight. "I apologize for my conduct on this path earlier today. It was a failure of discipline and a violation of regulations. I am sorry, sir." Bennett returned the salute with a single, precise motion. He offered no words. Patton then turned to the crowd of soldiers. He told them that the Third Army was a single machine. He said that a man who refuses to respect rank because of the color of a man's skin is a man who invites defeat. He declared that the uniform is the only skin that matters in combat. The witnesses watched in silence. They knew they had seen a world change. The hierarchy of the Old South had been crushed under a four-star heel. Colonel Henry Bennett stayed in the service for another decade. He returned to Georgia in 1955. He became a high school principal in a small town. He never spoke to his students about the morning in Trier. He only kept a small, tarnished silver eagle in a wooden box on his desk. It was a reminder of the weight of rank. Bennett died in 1982 and was buried with full military honors. He lived to see the army he loved change forever. Charles Whitfield was gone from the compound within 24 hours. He was transferred to a frontline infantry company. 3 weeks later, near the border of Czechoslovakia, he took a piece of German shrapnel to his hip. He was sent back to South Carolina with a permanent limp. He never reached the rank of captain. He spent the rest of his life in a quiet insurance office in Charleston. He died in 1974. He remained a bitter man who believed the world had turned upside down. General Patton never mentioned the confrontation in his memoirs. He kept a copy of the report in his personal ledger. He mentioned it once in a letter to his wife. He wrote that a soldier who refuses to salute is a soldier who has already surrendered to his own pride. To Patton, the uniform was the only skin that mattered in the business of war. Some historians argue that Patton was merely protecting the sanctity of military rank rather than fighting for social justice. They suggest that a single public apology could not heal the deep systemic rot of a segregated military. Others argue that Patton's uncompromising demand for discipline was exactly what was needed to bridge the racial divide during the heat of combat. They believe he realized that any crack in the chain of command was a threat to the entire army. What is certain is that the confrontation at Trier left a permanent mark on the record. It established that in the Third Army, the uniform was the ultimate authority. If you were Patton, would you have demanded a public apology or handled the discipline in private? Let us know in the comments. If you want more stories about what happened when prejudice met consequences, make sure to subscribe. The path at Trier remains silent, a reminder of the moment a lieutenant finally learned his place.